Hey folks, tonight we're diving behind the curtain into the life of an Ottoman concubine, usually just rumors or wild guesses. But the reality way messier power plays, politics, beauty contests, and cutthroat competition all happening inside the gold-plated walls of the royal palace. So before you get cozy, take a sec to like the video and subscribe, only if you actually dig what I'm doing here. And drop a comment telling me what channel you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's joining us worldwide. Now, dim those lights. Maybe turn on a fan for some white noise. Let's embark on tonight's journey together. You just woke up in the peak of the Harem Palace. Good news, you're surrounded by silk, satin, and rosewater perfume. Bad news, you're also sharing the space with 200 other concubines, all of whom might or might not be plotting to outshine you, outwit you, or in some cases, outlive you. You flutter awake on a mattress that looks like it was hand-stitched by blind angels using golden thread because maybe it was, think luxury, nope, more like pressure as smooth as velvet. Bells don't ring for prayers here. They ring for primping. You've got exactly 10 minutes to get that I woke up like this look down, which means painting your face like a Renaissance oil painting and smiling like you're loving every second. Rose oil for your skin, crushed pearls for your cheeks, and enough charcoal eyeliner to write a love letter on your eyelids. Mascara invented out of frustration and applied with a twig. Privacy never heard of her. You share your bedroom with women who might love you like sisters, or plot your downfall like mid-level villainous managers. Rumors spread faster than text messages. Alliances form over pomegranate seeds. Betrayal starts with a misplaced hairpin, and the scent. Imagine a jasmine mist mixed with anxiety, incense, and eternal hope trying to catch the king's attention. If Chanel ever launched a perfume called Ambition and Claustrophobia, this would be it. You stand, smooth out your embroidered scarf, hand-washed by a 12-year-old maid who somehow hates you, then head to morning roll call, where the senior concubines decide who gets summoned to meet the king, like a beauty pageant. But the prize is existential horror. No, you can't leave. Yes, you're always watched, and your survival depends on staying attractive, fragrant, and fertile. Welcome to a new day at the Ottoman Imperial Harem, where your first breath on waking is a power game, your smile is strategy, and your bed feels comfier than freedom, and things get weirder from here. Welcome to the hammam, the steamy spa where imperial politics get raw. You might think the baths are just for cleaning. Technically, you're right. But in the harem, it's also where alliances and simmering rivalries form alongside your foot soak, all with a whiff of lavender, lemon, and passive-aggressive tension. Concubines glide in like graceful ghosts, wrapped in embroidered silk towels. You do the same, pretending this isn't the most terrifying naked scene you've ever experienced. Older women sweep through the marble room like swans, dangerous swans with skin better than you've ever had. The attendant scrubs you with what feels like love, but is actually a sponge soaked in vengeance. Your skin tingles, your self-esteem plummets, You try not to make eye contact while getting exfoliated, just an inch away from your old life. You learn fast. The bath isn't just a bath. It's a surveillance room in disguise. Everyone's watching. Not openly, but subtly. Who's sitting with who? Who's whispering? Who's laughing a little too much? Many ask. Is the king's granddaughter's joke legit? You don't talk much? You're the newbie. Speaking up too soon in conversation is like swans, dangerous swans guarding territory, with skin nicer than anything you've ever had. The servant scrubs you down with something you think feels like love, but it's really just a revenge-soaked sponge. Your skin tingles. Your self-esteem takes a hit. You try not to make eye contact while they're scrubbing off what feels like your entire past life. You learn fast. A bath isn't just a bath. It's a surveillance room in disguise. Everyone's watching, not publicly, but in that sneaky way. Who's sitting next to who? Who's whispering? Who's laughing way? Too much is the king's granddaughter's joke actually funny. Don't say too much. Newbie. Opening your mouth too early in this social game is like flipping the chessboard upside down. The veterans will either ignore you or quietly decide you need fixing, usually by being reassigned chores or kicked out of society. That said, the hammam is your first real taste of soft power in the harem. You hear whispered stories about women who made it not just by catching the king's eye, but by cozying up to the right bath attendant, the right senior concubine, and having the right stories to share at the palace, a ghostly, emotionally rich presence in silk slippers. But really, now you're expected to master the empire's oldest skill at just the right fiery moment. It's also the only place in the palace where secrets accidentally spill out, usually between drops of water and fragrant soap. You find out who's in favor, who hasn't been called for months, who's rumored to have left a love letter embarrassing stuff, all overheard while someone's scrubbing your elbow like you personally offended them. You leave the harem bath pink, shiny, and about 12% more paranoid than when you came in. Congrats. Your skin's glowing, your mind's foggy from the heat. Jasmine and the close-up politics. If you thought harems were just silky pillows and distant flute music, how adorably naive. Now you know it's not a playground. It's more like a slow chess game, where the pretty boring pieces are dangerously valued. And then there's the eunuchs, specifically the black-skinned guards, the high-ranking castrated officers who report directly to the rightful king. They control who gets in and out of the harem, who's summoned, who's ignored, and sometimes who disappears without a trace, never to be mentioned again. They don't smile much. No need to. Their very presence ends careers. You quickly learn that if you want to survive or even thrive, you don't flatter the king. You befriend the eunuchs. No gifts involved. That's suspicious. Not with awkward flirting and totally inappropriate moves. No, the trick is respect, predictability, and above all, harmless usefulness. You ask for nothing. You're ready when summoned. You never gossip about them because news travels faster than plague in this palace. And you definitely don't want your name attached to an ending like, and then she was sent to the laundry room. Meanwhile, among the concubines, things get complicated. You try making friends a girl from Sarautia, pretending to like embroidery, but clearly plotting something long, cruel, and awful. You also have enemies, even if you don't know why. She stares at you too long during looting practice. You blink. She hasn't spoken to you since. Everything's subtle. Compliments are weapons. Smiles are bright. You start to miss the emotional simplicity of the old goat back in your village. But you learn. You learn to read silence, how to stand close enough to power without looking greedy, how to thank a weird creature for a letter like it's a holy scroll. And above all, you learn surviving here isn't about being the prettiest or the most talented. It's about understanding power expressed in glances, silences, and whose name gets dropped one day but vanishes the next. At first glance, being a concubine looks simple, look pretty, smile politely, and glide through the palace like a moody ghost in silk slippers. But in reality, you're now expected to master the empire's oldest skill, absorb everything while seeming to absorb nothing. You're a sponge, a fragrant, jewel-studded sponge embroidered with countless tulips, while memorizing who sits where, who's glaring at whom, and who got an extra plum at breakfast. Subtle changes in fruit distribution, this palace's version of a coup. Your daily schedule now includes hours of training that look like schooling but feel like political boot camp. You're taught music, literature, poetry, Islamic law, Ottoman etiquette, and if you're lucky, how not to faint during dance lessons. The idea is to be beautiful, yes, but also charmingly smart without being threatening like a decorative peacock that attracts eyes but says nothing. Absorb everything while pretending to absorb nothing. You're a sponge, a fragrant sponge studded with jewels, embroidered with countless tulip flowers, all while memorizing who sits where, who's glaring at whom, and who gets an extra apricot at breakfast. Subtle changes in fruit distribution. In this palace, this is basically a coup. Your daily schedule now includes hours of training that sound like studying, but really feel like prepping for politics. You're taught music, literature, poetry, Islamic law, Ottoman etiquette, and if you're lucky, how not to faint during dance lessons. The idea is to be beautiful, yes, but also charmingly smart without threatening anyone like a fancy peacock you look at but don't hear. But the real education happens in the in-between moments. You learn to notice exactly how long it takes to clear the sultan's tray and who clears it. You pay attention to which monster appears right before bad news drops. You remember who's missing. Threaten like a peacock, flashy enough to grab attention, but totally useless for actual talking. But the real schooling happens in the middle. You learn exactly how long it takes to clear the sultan's tray, and who's the unlucky monster tasked with clearing it. You watch who shows up right before the bad news hits. You remember who's mysteriously missing. You never ask why. You listen way more than you talk, actually. You're not allowed to speak unless someone 3 ranks above you says so. Even then, keep it short, ideally a humble, clever little comment that flatters them without revealing your agenda. And while you sit there, hands neatly folded over, some embroidery, maybe a wonky pigeon, you're quietly filing every interaction into your mental scroll alliances, disdain, chances, names, especially names. You're also starting to get the unofficial ranking system. Who's favored, who's tolerated, who's about to get kicked into the kitchen for missing 3 meals straight right now. You're somewhere between newbie excitement and wall decor acceptance. Don't worry. That's better than it sounds. Because honestly, in the Ottoman world, looking harmless is one of the most dangerous things you can do, and you're starting to nail it. There are 2 kinds of fear in the harem: fear of being ignored and fear of being noticed. Today, you're flirting dangerously with the latter. It all starts innocently. You get handed a new robe, not your usual pale gray cotton you've worn for weeks, but a bold silk number trimmed with roses, embroidered with tiny golden vines. You stare at it like it just proposed to you. From legit sultan's steward to the maid muttering with eyes downcast. This could mean anything. Maybe you're being rewarded. Maybe you're being tested. Maybe it's for another concubine, and you're now part of someone else's assassination plot with surprising chill. You put it on. It fits suspiciously well. As you walk down the harem corridor, other women notice not openly, but with perfectly timed pauses in conversation, raised eyebrows, and look sharp enough to cut embroidered threads. You sit through morning prayers a little straighter. You pretend not to notice. You've been shuffled a bit closer to the front, not right next to the favorites, but not wallpaper either. Then comes the rose. That afternoon, a unicorn will bring a single pink rose to your room. Just one, no note, no explanation. You clutch it like it's about to explode. Palace rules say this could mean anything. Maybe the king noticed you, or someone wants it to look like that. Or maybe you're being set up as palace gossip bait. The deadliest game of telephone in Ottoman history. The safest move is to wedge the rose between your prayer book pages and tell no one, not even your shadow, especially your shadow. She gossips. That night, you go to bed in pink silk, feeling like the target of a Valentine's Day card in the harem. Growing too fast is suspicious. Standing out is dangerous. But disappearing is worse. So you keep your posture, sip some juice, and brace for whatever this combo of robe and rose means. Because it could be everything or nothing. And here, both are equally terrifying. Dinner at the harem isn't dinner. It's theater, competitive, seasoned theater where everyone wears silk and pretends they're not sizing up their enemies between bites of stewed lamb. You enter the great dining hall and take your seat, not too close to center. You're not worthy, and not too far into the shadows. You're not invisible yet. Seating is a constantly shifting status map. 1 week. You sit beside a loot-hunting player who knows everyone's secrets. Next. You're next to a woman who hasn't spoken since 1572. Food arrives on a tray, silently carried by a eunuch saffron rice bowl. Pomegranate-studded kale, grape leaves, sweet fruit cream in crystal glasses, all delicate, intense, and emotionally intimidating. No one's in a rush, and sit in your spot, not too close to the center. You're not worthy of that, and not too far in the shadows either. You're not invisible yet. Seating arrangements shift constantly like a status map. 1 week, you're next to a loot-hunting player who knows everyone's secrets. Next, you're beside a woman who hasn't spoken since 1572. Food arrives on a tray silently carried by an eunuch saffron rice, curly lettuce sprinkled with pomegranate seeds, grape leaves, sweet fruit cream in a crystal glass, all exquisite, intense, and emotionally threatening. Nobody rushes. That would be downright rude. You sip slowly, gracefully, like someone who doesn't really need food because she's nourished by poetry and curiosity instead. Conversations are silent. No one laughs too loudly unless they're trying to send a message. I'm confident enough to have fun in this snake pit. You nod politely. You laugh just enough. In any case, you never ask for more bread. Hunger is weakness. Gluttony, too. Also, someone might be watching to see if you steal 2 figs. You catch the eye of another concubine sitting opposite you. She's the newbie, or maybe not. No matter what, you're not getting any extra bread. Hunger is weakness. Greed even worse. Also, someone might be watching to see if you snag 2 figs. You catch the eye of another concubine sitting across. She's new, or maybe she's old, but got reincarnated with a better tailor. Either way, her earrings are way too flashy for her rank. And that smile, oh, that's the kind of smile that screams long-term scheming. You stop making eye contact before she decides you're trouble. Then comes the part nobody admits to watching the monster walk in. When he enters, the air changes. If he's heading your way, that means a letter, an invitation, something. You keep your cool on the outside. Inside, your soul might be breakdancing or, just mildly freaking out. If he passes you by, you nod like it's the best news ever. Nobody wants to be summoned. You're busy suspiciously nibbling fancy grapes. By the end of dinner, nothing happens, and everything has happened. Power shifts through raised eyebrows and polite laughs. You stand, bow, and leave, still hungry, still smiling, still in the game. You try to sleep, which is adorable because the harem at night is like a theater after the show. Dim, silent, but full of tension. Lanterns flicker weakly, fountains gurgle outside, and you lie awake wondering if tonight's the night a monster knocks on your door. You know the rules. The king chooses secretly, sometimes on purpose, sometimes on a whim, sometimes because he noticed a girl dropping a fig with extra flair. No pattern, no logic, just vague anticipation and anxiety. Around you, the other women pretend to sleep. One breathes way too loud. Another keeps fiddling with her veil, like it could protect her from bad news or bad luck. Everyone's pretending not to care, but you care. Of course, you care. You got a rose 2 days ago and you're still trying to figure out if it's a compliment or a warning. Maybe both, or maybe neither. Palace gossip is like poetry written by a committee of spies. Suddenly, there's a soft footstep. A door slams somewhere. Somewhere, a weird creature whispers a name, not yours. You exhale. Relief, disappointment, a cocktail of emotions served in a silver cup. You roll over and close your eyes just as your mind starts staging imaginary conversations with the king in 3 different languages. All ones you're still learning. You dream, but not of home. That place is too blurry now. You dream of the woman across the table with earrings way too big for her status. She smiles at you in the dream. You wake up absolutely sure she wants you demoted, exiled, or at least stuck in robbery lessons for life. You dab rose water under your nose and pretend it's calming. It's not, but it smells like control. At some point, just before dawn, you finally fall asleep. You survived another night without being chosen, not erased, not accidentally looking too eager or too boring. And in Topkapi Palace, that's not just sleep, that's a diplomatic win. There are two stories whispered around the harem. One's a fairy tale about the king noticing you and your life changing with luxury, power, and the occasional walnut-sized diamond. The other is what actually happens. The king, ruler of an empire stretching from Hungary to Arabia, might remember your name or might not. You're one of hundreds. He might call you because you look like a painting he once saw, or because his coffee tastes a bit bitter and he wants entertainment. When the eunuch knocks on your door after dark, he doesn't explain anything, just bows. You don't accidentally look too eager or too bored. And in Topkapi Palace, that's not sleeping, that's a diplomatic victory. There are two stories whispered in the harem. One is the fairy tale about the king noticing. Your life gets flipped upside down by luxury, power, and oh yeah, the occasional walnut-sized diamond, the rest. That's what really goes down. The king, ruler of an empire stretching from Hungary to Arabia, might remember your name or not. You're one face among hundreds. He might summon you because you look like a painting he once saw, or because his coffee's a bit bitter and he needs some entertainment. When a eunuch knocks on your door after dark, he doesn't explain anything, just bows. You get the hint. When the eunuch knocks after dark, he doesn't bother explaining. He just nods politely. You quietly stand up, your heart pounding like a royal drum in your ears. You're led down lantern-lit halls, smelling of sandalwood. Hundreds have walked this path, but only a few returned with stories worth surviving for. You enter a room where your reflection is made from mosaics of tiles and polished brass. The last servant adjusts your veil, drips a bit of oil behind your ear, and looks at you like they want to say smile. But don't overdo it. Speak, but only when spoken to, and for Allah's sake, don't trip. You step forward, and there's the Sultan, the guy you were trained to fear. Imagine, and maybe accidentally, dream about during Quran lessons. He's in silk robes with a confused look. He says, "Your name, your new name, not the one your mother gave you." He asks where you're from. You lie smoothly. You talk about poetry. He nods. Then he hands you a fig. What does it mean? Everything in the harem is a metaphor. This fig's no different. Is it a test of wit, an invitation, or a subtle hint about his diet? You hold the fig, peel it gently, and respond with something both elegant and mysterious, like sweet things, hiding bitterness. You hope it sounds profound, but maybe it just sounds hungry. The night passes with conversations, music, and silence that occasionally feels like judgment. When you're shown the door, it's just a nod. You are escorted back alone, intact, but totally confused. You've caught attention, and now things are about to get complicated. You return just before dawn, walking lighter than usual, like a heavy step might shatter any enchantments that briefly touched you. You doze off, sort of, more like you lie beside the most powerful man in the empire, desperately trying not to sweat through the perfume. You're charming. You think you said something about poetry or maybe goats. You're not sure anymore. The guards don't say a word as you pass. Fine, silence is always better than a sly smile. Back in the harem, the air smells different. Still jasmine, still rose oil in the halls, but now with a dash of something fresh. Attention. The concubines don't look you straight in the eye. That's rude, but you feel their gazes slice across your shoulders like decorative knives. At breakfast, your seat has shifted slightly closer to the center, not obvious, but enough to say she might. Now that makes sense. Your cream is colder than everyone else's. It's the little luxuries that give you away. You're still you, technically low rank, still expected to attend lessons, still responsible for way too many embroidered towels. But now you're under surveillance, not palace guards, but everyone. Girls who never spoke to you suddenly want to share their favorite Persian poems. A servant accidentally leaves a pomegranate on your tray, a fruit symbolizing fertility, as subtle as dropping a baby cradle in your lap. Even your enemies get polite. They nod softly, yet their eyes remain sharp and amused like cats watching candles. The older concubines show no reaction. They've seen this before. Some were you 5 years ago. One or two might still be you. You spend the rest of the day doing what the harem taught you best, appearing calm. You speak when greeted, smile just enough. You move like you belong here because, well, you actually do. But the real trick is not letting anyone see how you really feel, because in this palace, emotions are currency, and your emotions are trading wildly. Now you've climbed the palace's secret ladder, the one no one talks about, but everyone's scrambling up in the softest slippers. It doesn't lean against a wall. It hangs, shifts, and occasionally snaps under the weight of ambition. The first steps survive. Now you're climbing the palace ladder, the one no one talks about, but everyone's desperately scrambling up in their coziest slippers. It doesn't lean against a wall. It's floating, shifting, and sometimes snaps in half under the weight of ambition. Step 1, dodge the spotlight. Your new Ottoman name, officially assigned, is whispered more often now. Quietly, of course. No need to announce yourself to the whole palace. Just enough to make you feel like a character in someone else's drama. One day, a concubine actually compliments your embroidery, having previously thought you were just part of the cleaning crew. The next day, you're invited to try fig jam by someone who'd rather poison you than promote your breakfast. You politely decline. Oh, and you've been moved to a new room. It's got 2 extra cushions, better lighting, and a mirror that doesn't turn your face into a medieval fresco. That's not generosity. That's a signal you're slowly rising, like steam in a sauna, visible, fleeting, and sometimes scolded. And so begins the dangerous balancing act called strategic humility. Show too much pride, and you're arrogant. Show too much humility, and you're manipulative. Trip over your robe and faceplant on the prayer rug. Fine, but people will gossip anyway. King Valde, the Queen Mother, and CEO of all things shiny, starts noticing you, not directly, of course, but her steward now nods at you in the hallway. Basically, that's either a thumbs up or a watch your back, maybe both. Meanwhile, your friends split into factions, friendly opportunists, silent threats, and this scary girl who apparently survives on melanin-fueled revenge alone. You learn to get through it all with smiles that say, "I respect you," and eyes that whisper, "But I'll outlive you." Pearls start appearing on your sun-kissed calves one morning. Little pearls on your collar, a gift, a test, or just pearls. You wear them carefully, like shiny armor. Every gesture counts now. How you walk, how you bow, how long you hold someone's gaze. This is not flirting. This is diplomacy. In your slippers, you're climbing gently, cautiously, and if you fall, the floor is paved with other girls who once wore pearls. There are moments in palace life that make your heart race. Being summoned by the king is one. Being officially noticed by the king, that's a whole other level. She doesn't just run the palace. She's the ruler, the architect of alliances, the keeper of tradition, a kindly grandmother one minute, a political storm the next. And today, she's looking at you, not a glance, not a polite nod, but a full-on, direct, thoughtful look, the kind that says she knows where you came from, where you're going, and how you chew your cucumber slices. You react the only way you can, internally. You panic, externally. You bow mechanically, lower your eyes just enough to show respect, but not submission, and immediately start second-guessing every outfit you've worn in the past month. Then a steward arrives with a message. You're invited, yes. Invited to assist with one of Valida's charity sewing projects. Translation: she wants to watch you in a room full of sharp, older women who can spot ambition from 500 paces. You arrive on time, not too early perfect, not too late that's suicide. They sit around, cushions everywhere, embroidery hoops, and a silence so thick you're afraid to speak first. You don't say a word, threading your needle, pretending this isn't a covert job interview for a servant position. The other women chat politely. Valida listens, occasionally. She asks a question. Where did you study? What's your favorite surah? Ever met anyone who really understands politics? You answer carefully, gracefully, like your entire future depends on it because, spoiler, it does. Sometimes she smiles, not at you, but beside you, basically the same thing. When it's over, you bow again and leave, with the calm of someone unsure if they just got promoted or assigned towel duty. Back in your room, your roommate stares at you like you just rode in on a dragon. The other ladies chat politely. Validas listens. Occasionally, she throws in a question. Where did you study? What's your favorite surah? Ever met anyone who actually gets politics? You answer carefully, charmingly, like your entire future depends on it, because spoiler alert, it does. Sometimes she smiles not at you, but beside you, which is basically the same thing. When it's over, you bow and leave with the calm of someone who's not sure if they just got promoted or assigned to towel duty. Back in your room, Your roommate stares like you just rode in on a dragon. She's looking at you. She whispers. You nod, smile weakly. You don't say it out loud. But yeah, that's exactly what just happened. And you're sweating bullets. The glorious task of towel duty. Back in your room. Your roommate stares at you like you just rode in on a dragon. She's looking at you. She whispers. You nod, smile weakly. You don't say it out loud. But yeah, that's exactly what just happened. And you're still sweating bullets. There's a knock on your door, not the polite little tap from a friend, nor the impatient pounding of a towel-wielding monster. This knock means business, the kind that comes with consequences. A message is delivered. One of the king's favored concubines invites you to a private tea party. A message is delivered to you. One of the king's favorite concubines invites you to a private tea party. Her name is whispered through the fragrant air like a lullaby sung with a knife. She's fierce, calm, and depending on who you ask. Either your best shot at survival or the reason girls mysteriously vanish during lunch. You accept. Of course you say yes, because saying no in a harem is about as effective as throwing a fig at a cavalry charge. You dress carefully, not too flashy, or she'll think you're challenging her, not too plain, or she'll think you're insulting her. You pick elegance with just enough modesty, topping it off with a hairpin that says, I'm capable, but haven't made any moves yet. The room is small, smells nice, and is eerily quiet. She sits alone, reclining like someone just invented the art of leaning back. Her robe is embroidered with threads probably pricier than your homeland. She motions for you to sit. You sit gracefully, head bowed just enough to show respect, but not desperation. She pours the tea. That gesture could be generous or symbolic, or maybe both. Then comes a masterclass in veiled threats and backhanded compliments. She tells you she's heard you caught the attention of some powerful eyes. She says it like you accidentally adopted a wild leopard. She smiles when you answer. You can't tell if she liked your answer or just marked you for later chat. You talk about poetry, music, and the carefully choreographed court rituals. She nods non-stop, occasionally. She glances at the door, as if calculating whether you're worth her time or just another chapter in her scrapbook of rising stars. After the second cup, she sends you off with a smile that could either knock you over or swallow you whole. A career. Maybe you return to your room exhausted and a little confused, recruited, warned, or quietly accepted. Either way, someone very important now knows your name, and that's both a blessing and a curse. Your greatest asset and your newest burden. You've learned that words in the harem are like spices used, sparingly and always with purpose. Talk too much, you get exposed. Talk too little, you get forgotten. But if you speak just enough and let silence do the rest, that's when you become dangerous. Today's lesson begins in the music room, where a clique of senior concubines gather to discuss poetry, philosophy, and let's be honest, the music room, where a bunch of high-ranking concubines gather to chat about poetry, philosophy, and let's be honest, gossip. You're invited to sit, not to speak. Just to sit, a test cleverly disguised as hospitality. You show up on time, Play the part of the polite guest, folding yourself neatly into a corner like a well-pressed napkin. You sip your juice occasionally. You nod. You pretend to be interested, but not too eager. You chuckle softly at a joke, just enough to pass as human. Then it happens. One of the older ladies turns to you and asks a question. Not a trap. No, just a question. Then it happens. One of the older women turns to you and asks a question. Not a trap. No drama. Just a simple question about your thoughts on a room verse. But do you know what this really is? They're not testing your poetry taste. They're testing your timing skills. You pause just long enough to seem thoughtful, not too long to look like you're desperately searching for a sure answer. Then you say something that sounds deep, respectful, and, above all, vague. They nod. They're satisfied. You've passed. Then you get asked again about the new charity initiative by the legitimate king. You don't say a word of criticism. You praise the elegance of the idea without pretending to understand the politics behind it. You throw in words like humble and visionary. You're playing chess with invisible queens. The truth is, the greatest power in Haram lies in silence, in a knowing glance, in a smile that barely reaches the eyes, in the pause before someone answers, where everyone leans in slightly to see which way the wind blows. You leave that room after speaking less than 10 sentences, and somehow your name gets mentioned more than 3 times compared to yesterday. You're not just surviving, you're learning how to glide smoothly, precisely, and gracefully through a world where, before anyone answers, everyone leans in slightly, trying to catch which way the wind blows. You leave the room after saying less than 10 sentences, and somehow your name is mentioned more than 3 times compared to yesterday. You're not just surviving, you're learning to glide smoothly, precisely, and gracefully through a world where silence says more than any bold declaration. And those walls, yeah, they're still listening. You find a gift on your pillow. No note, no signature, just a small velvet box tied with a pale ribbon, a dried rose petal, and maybe a hidden judgment. You slowly open it like you would anything in this room, half expecting perfume, half expecting a scorpion. Its jewelry, a fancy bracelet, inlaid with turquoise and gold. Beautiful, elegant, but also kinda creepy, because nothing here is just a gift. You glance around the room. Your roommate raises an eyebrow. She doesn't ask a thing. Either she's super polite, or she really trusts your talent for plausible denial. That bracelet's definitely expensive, way too pricey for normal jewelry, not fancy enough for a king, which makes you think of some rich, scheming control freak, or you're wearing it. Of course, it's a game. By mid-morning, rumors start flying. She got a gift. Someone whispers by. The fountain, from who another voice answers. She doesn't say the answer will come, but here, that answer is like telling everyone to pick the worst or juiciest option. You keep your face calm, a mix of humility, confusion, and slight boredom. Meanwhile, your internal monologue runs through every past conversation, hunting for enemies, allies, and anyone with a taste for turquoise. By lunch, the rumors have evolved. You're said to have received a secret message, a secret offer, and a family heirloom passed down directly from King Valent. All wrong, but all dangerously believable. Then come the whispered warnings. A low-level maid, easy to ignore, drops your tray and mutters, "Watch out for anyone handing you things when they can't look you in the eye." You thank her, because that's what you do. When someone indirectly warns you about sabotage while pretending to be clumsy, you still wear the bracelet, but you sleep with it under your pillow, just in case. In a harem, gifts rarely mean love. They're tests, chains, labels, or gentle reminders your name's being whispered in rooms you've never set foot in. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you wear isn't a smile, but proof someone wants to own you. One morning, right before prayers, you're summoned, not by a god, not by a servant, but by a letter, sealed with royal blue wax, delivered with no explanation, just a hint that everything's about to change. You sit, alone, reading it. The handwriting's elegant, the offer's clear. You're getting promoted, moving to a more private place, closer to the king, closer to the palace center, away from anonymity. On paper, it's a promotion, but in this harem, promotion is just a fancy word for show-off. Except now, you step into the world of real power, politics, intrigue, royal baby-making potential, becoming a consort, maybe even the king's favorite. That's what some women dream of. It's also where women disappear. You have until sunset to answer, so you wander the garden, where you once hid under the shadows of older consorts. Now they look smaller. The fountain still babbles. Tulips still bloom like delicate secrets, but the air feels different. Now they're whispering your name. You think of home, now a blurry memory. You think of other girls, those who never rose, those who rose too fast, those smart but not quite smart enough. And you think of yourself, not the trained, ritual poetry version, but the girl who came here with an old name hidden somewhere between your ribs. That night, you dress carefully, one last choice. You step through the curtains, the silk borders, between the known and unknown, and in the silence, you answer. Maybe you'll rise, maybe you'll trained in etiquette and poetry. But she's the girl who came here with an old name hidden somewhere between two sides. That night, she dressed carefully, a final choice. She stepped through curtains, silk borders, separating the known from the unknown, and in the silence, she answered. Maybe she'd rise, maybe she'd disappear. Maybe her name would be written into palace history, or maybe it was whispered one last time and folded away like a silk handkerchief in a drawer no one opens anymore. But one thing was certain, she was not just decoration. She was a strategist on Saturn, a survivor in the perfume trade, a master of restraint, and for a whole day, maybe longer, you have walked the tightrope between power and danger without falling, long before comic books and Hollywood blockbusters existed. The ancient world had its own Amazon warriors, and yeah, they were terrifying. Meet the Scythian women horseback archers from the Eurasian steppe, who didn't just challenge gender norms, They loaded arrows and galloped like total bosses. The Scythians were nomads roaming what's now Ukraine, southern Russia, and parts of Central Asia. Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote about fierce Amazon women pairing up with Scythian men to birth a warrior tribe. For centuries, scholars thought this was just Greek imagination fueled by too much wine. But recent archaeology tells another story, one backed by solid evidence. Excavations of Scythian burial mounds, or kurgans, uncovered. Female skeletons buried fully decked out as warriors' swords, spears, quivers, and even battle scars. One young woman's skeleton, found in the Alai region, had an arrowhead lodged in her spine, brutal proof she fought and died in battle. Some were buried with armored horses. This wasn't some ceremonial prop show. These were battle-ready, worn for real armors. This culture didn't just allow women to fight, it expected it. Scythian society, unlike most ancient ones, wasn't rigidly patriarchal. While men raided and hunted, women often did the same. Girls learned horseback riding and archery from childhood, and elite women could hold influential positions. There are even signs some Scythian priestesses held spiritual power, feared on the battlefield and revered in rituals. The Greeks were both terrified and fascinated. They spun the legend of the Amazons' wild female warriors who hated men and lived apart from civilization. But at the heart of that myth were their real encounters with the Scythians. These women didn't fit the submissive family mold of Greek women. They were strangers, strong, and thus mythologized. So next time someone claims female warriors are just fantasy, remind them the Scythians pulled this off about 2,500 years ago. And their legacy isn't just in legends, but in skeletons pierced by arrows and truths as sharp as iron buried under the steppes. If you think battlefield leadership is strictly a man's game, you clearly haven't met Africa's queens. They weren't pampered palace types lounging in silk. They were seasoned rulers, army leaders, treaty negotiators, staring down empires without blinking. They didn't just join wars, they rewrote the rules. Take Queen Amanirenas of Kush, for example. In the 1st century BCE, the Roman Empire, fresh off absorbing Egypt, made a tactical blunder trying to push south into Nubia. Amanirenas, a one-eyed warrior queen, had other plans. She rallied her people, launched a series of counterattacks, even captured Roman forts. She beheaded a statue of Augustus and buried the head beneath her temple steps. Talk about sending a rude message. Eventually, Rome caved and signed a peace deal. Yup. One of history's mightiest empires was forced to make peace with a one-eyed warrior queen, and she wasn't alone. Across Africa, female leaders often doubled as military commanders. In the 16th century, Queen Amina of Zazzau, in what's now Nigeria, led cavalry raids all over the Hausa lands. Oral tradition says she expanded her territory. Amanirenas of Kush, as an example, in the 1st century BC, the Roman Empire, fresh off annexing Egypt, made a tactical blunder trying to push south into Nubia. Amanirenas, a one-eyed queen who'd fought on battlefields before, had other plans. She rallied her people, launched a series of counterattacks, and even captured Roman fortresses. She beheaded a statue of Augustus and buried the head beneath her temple steps. Oh, message so rude, it could have broken a few diplomatic tables. Eventually, Rome gave in and negotiated peace. Yep. One of the most powerful empires in history had to make nice with a one-eyed warrior queen. And she wasn't alone. Across Africa, female leaders often doubled as military commanders. In the 16th century, Queen Amina of Zazzau, modern-day Nigeria, led cavalry raids all over the Hausa lands. Oral tradition says she expanded her territory further than any ruler before or after her. Amina built walls around cities, developed trade routes, and, most importantly, never let her gender hold her back on the battlefield. Her soldiers respected her, not just because she was queen, but because she could fight better than most of them further south. The kingdom of Dahomey was guarded by, forced to make peace with a one-eyed warrior queen, and she's not alone. Across Africa, female leaders often also served as military commanders. In the 16th century, Queen Amina of Zazzau, now in modern Nigeria, led cavalry raids across Hausa lands. According to oral tradition, she expanded her territory farther than any ruler before or after her. Amina built city walls, developed trade routes, and most importantly, never let her gender limit her power on the battlefield. Her soldiers respected her, not just because she was queen, but because she could fight better than most of them. Further south, the kingdom of Dahomey was guarded by the Ahosi, an all-female military regiment, later nicknamed the Dahomey Amazons by the French. These were no symbolic bodyguards. They were frontline warriors, trained from childhood in weapons, endurance, and they were frontline warriors, trained from childhood in weapons, endurance, and discipline. They served as elite royal guards and often led battles. Some accounts even describe them as more aggressive than their male counterparts. Maybe they had more to prove, or maybe they just loved the job. These women weren't some rare exception. In many African societies, women were expected to be politically, economically, and militarily capable. They negotiated with colonizers, resisted conquest, and commanded armies. Their existence wasn't radical, it was culture. So next time someone says history was written by men with swords, you might want to add, sure, but some of those swords were wielded by queens. When you picture war in ancient Greece or Rome, you usually imagine rows of armored men marching off to battle, but stick around behind the front lines, and you'll find a different kind of warrior, someone fighting without armor, but still holding a weapon when the city gates are about to fall. Women in both Greek and Roman societies were often forced into defensive roles, and they didn't hesitate to stand up and fight. In ancient Athens, women were officially exempt from military service. Their roles were mostly family, religion, or symbolic. But when invaders showed up at the door, that line blurred real quick. For example, during the Persian Wars, Greek women helped with logistics, moved supplies, tended the wounded, and in some desperate moments, threw roof tiles down from the city walls onto the enemy. Not the glamorous side of battle, but hey, it made a difference. The siege of Plataea in 429 BC gave us a standout moment. Women trapped inside the city grabbed weapons, fought alongside the remaining defenders, and according to Thucydides, played a crucial role in the resistance. Not trained soldiers, just citizens turned fighters. But war isn't always patient enough to wait for training. In Rome, technically, women were banned from the army. Still, Roman history is packed with stories of women stepping up when everything fell apart. During the Gaul sack of Rome in 390 BC, women reportedly negotiated with the invaders, handed over their jewelry to fund the defense, and helped boost morale. In later conflicts, like the Second Punic War, Roman women often followed their husbands to military camps, some even acting as unofficial strategists or advisors. One particularly notable story comes from the sack of Rome in 410 AD, when Alaric's entire Visigoth force attacked the city. Noblewomen like Proba and others reportedly opened their estates as shelters, armed their servants, and coordinated resistance amid the city's chaos. They weren't passive victims. They were active defenders fighting to survive. In the ancient world, war wasn't just swords swinging on the battlefield. It involved quick thinking, courage, and sometimes sheer desperation, and women were always there, guarding their homes when no one else could. If you were a Roman governor in Britannia around 60 AD, your worst nightmare had a name, Boudica. She wasn't just a queen. She was revenge, fire, and fury wrapped in one, with a talent for rallying the entire angry population of Britain into open revolt against the world's most powerful empire. Boudica ruled the Iceni tribe in eastern England after her husband, King Prasutagus, died. He left his kingdom to his daughters, and the Roman Empire a plan to keep the peace. But Rome being Rome, they ignored the will, annexed the land, and openly whipped Boudica, and in a move so brutal it's still talked about today. They beat her daughters. This was more than political domination. It was humiliation, and Boudica wasn't having any of that. What happened next wasn't a minor rebellion. It was full-scale war. Boudica became the face of the uprising, leading a tribal alliance in a scorched earth campaign that shook Roman control to its core. First stop was Camalodunum, now Colchester, a fully Roman-built town. Then Londinium, today's London, was burned to the ground. Verulamium, now St. Albans, met the same fate. Roman historian Cassius Dio described her as tall, terrifying, with fiery red hair and a fierce presence that drove her warriors wild. Meanwhile, Tacitus highlighted her eloquence and leadership, portraying her treatment of soldiers not as a noblewoman, but as a wronged mother and awakened warrior. Despite early victories, Boudica's army eventually faced off against the professional Roman forces under governors Suetonius Paulinus. Outnumbered and poorly equipped, the rebels were massacred. Boudica either drank poison or died. Battle. Sources don't quite agree, but that loss didn't erase her impact. The Romans learned their lesson. They got way more careful dealing with tribal leaders, and they never forgot the name of the woman who shook an empire to its core. Boudica's rebellion wasn't just an uprising. It was a reminder that oppressed people, led by someone with nothing left to lose, can be the most dangerous force around, and in this case, that force was a mom with a war chariot and a long memory. In feudal Japan, samurai are almost always pictured as men, tough warriors in lacquered armor, loyal to death, swords in hand, but look past the cherry blossoms and the samurai scrolls, and you'll find a different kind of samurai one dressed in silk and steel on a bugeisha. The female warriors were not only real, but seriously badass, trained in martial arts, archery, and strategy. These noble women were the hidden backbone of many samurai clans. They usually didn't fight outdoor battles like the guys, but when homes, castles, or family honor were under threat, they jumped into battle without hesitation and often without mercy. One of the most iconic Onabugeisha was Tomo e Gozen, a 12th century warrior who fought in the Genpei War. Featured in Heike Monogatari, Japan's epic about war and honor, Tomoe was said to be an unbeatable knight and a sharp archer who could take down foes with a single katana strike. She rode into battle like a storm, fully armored, her long black hair flying behind her like a war banner in the Battle of Iwazu. She supposedly beheaded an enemy samurai in a one-on-one fight, a final blaze of glory, before vanishing from history like a ghost on horseback. Then there's Nakano Takeko, a 19th century warrior in the Boshin War. She wasn't even officially part of the imperial army. Women weren't allowed, so she started her own unofficial female warrior unit, fighting with naginata, a long-handled weapon. She died leading an attack against imperial forces, shot in the chest. Her last wish to be buried properly by her sister, so enemies couldn't snatch her body. These women aren't just legends or symbols. They were part of a martial tradition upholding Bushido values: loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. Some were even trained just like their male counterparts during wartime. Of course, when Japan modernized and beefed up its military, Onabugeisha got pushed aside, and their stories faded into folklore, but the truth remains in Japan's bloody history of samurai clashes and castle sieges. Women's blades were sharpened just as often and just as deadly. The Roman arena, a monument to cruelty, entertainment, and testosterone-fueled violence. Lions, spears, slaves, and sweaty men fighting for their lives. But what if I told you it wasn't just men throwing down? In the arena beneath the legend of Roman gladiators lies the lesser-known reality of female gladiators, gladiatresses. Rare, sure, but they existed, and they weren't there to hand out snacks. They fought in front of roaring crowds, trained at the same gladiator schools, often met with a mix of excitement and horror. Roman emperors, especially the theatrically inclined like Nero and Domitian, loved the shock factor of women in the arena. Fighting, female gladiators were a novelty. Yes, but also fierce warriors. The evidence is sparse but convincing. A marble relief from Halicarnassus shows two women, Amazon and Achillea, battling it out. The carving even notes they fought to a draw, considered an honorable result. For samurai clashes and castle sieges, Women's blades were sharpened just as often and just as deadly. The Roman arena, a monument to cruelty, testosterone-fueled violence, and entertainment, lions, spears, slaves, and sweaty men fighting for their lives. But what if I told you sometimes the fighters weren't just men beneath the gladiator legend? Lies the lesser-known truth about female gladiators. The gladiatrices, rare but real, these women weren't there to serve snacks. They fought before roaring crowds, trained at the same gladiator schools, often greeted with a mix of excitement and horror. Roman emperors, especially the theatrical types like Nero and Domitian, loved the shock factor of women fighting in the arena. Female gladiators were a novelty, sure, but also fierce warriors. The evidence, scattered but convincing, includes a marble relief from Halicarnassus showing two women, Amazon and Achillea, battling it out. The carving even notes they fought to a draw, which was a pretty big deal. Their names weren't random, evoking legendary female warriors, showing these women weren't weak imitators, but fierce fighters on par. Literary sources mention them too. Young women, fond of snark, never missed a chance to judge and mock. Upper-class women trained as gladiators, calling it a shameful denial of femininity. Others, like Suetonius, noted female fighters sometimes appeared in torchlit night shows, cheered on by drunken crowds who probably weren't there for the fine art of tactical command. But the training was real, and the danger wasn't fake. These women fought with swords, tridents, and nets just like the male gladiators, and they bled just as much. They were usually slaves, prisoners of war, or convicted criminals thrown into the arena. Some were volunteers, octorati, who chose gladiator life chasing fame, money, or maybe just to dodge a worse fate. Around 200 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus banned women from gladiator fights, probably worried Rome's taste for female warriors was getting a bit too weird, or maybe because they were just too good at it. So, even though they didn't dominate the arena, gladiators carved out their own brutal, bloody space. Arcs, the sand. Gender didn't mean much. Skill, ferocity, and survival were all that mattered. Medieval battlefields weren't just a boys-only club in shining armor. While most women weren't officially in combat roles, some either missed the memo or flat out ignored it, whether dressing as men, leading armies as abbesses, or just refusing to stay cloistered when swords started swinging. Medieval women found ways to fight literally and figuratively. One of the strangest groups of female fighters were warrior nuns. During the Crusades, some devout women did more than just pray for victory. They picked up weapons, while most acted defensively. Records show some nuns abused power and took command when their convents or lands were threatened. In the 12th century, the abbess of Quedlinburg was both a spiritual and military leader, commanding vassals in battle as head of a powerful religious territory. She didn't wear armor, but she definitely gave orders like a general. Then there were women who simply became men, at least on paper. Medieval records reveal plenty of women who disguised themselves as men to enlist. Some got caught and executed. Others slipped under the radar for years. Take the story of a woman known only as John, who served in an English garrison during the 100 Years' War. When discovered, her comrades apparently just shrugged and let her keep fighting because she gave it just as much fight as they did. Of course, Joan of Arc is the superstar of this category, a teenage peasant girl who claimed divine visions, donned men's armor, and led the French army to stunning victories that shocked all of Europe. But for every Joan, there were dozens of unknown women without visions or sainthood, just grit and opportunity. Even off the battlefield, women played strategic roles. Noble women in besieged castles often coordinated defenses, distributed supplies, and negotiated with enemy forces. Eleanor of Aquitaine, though not a sword-wielding warrior, joined her husband on a crusade and was rumored to have worn armor. Whether that was a statement, protection, or just a show is still debated. So what's the takeaway? The Middle Ages weren't as dull as you thought. Women found cracks in rigid systems, bent rules, or just made new ones. And even if history forgot their names, you can definitely still feel their presence on the battlefield. When people think of the medieval Islamic world, they picture flowing robes, grand palace gowns, or scholars debating science and philosophy. What they usually forget are the women with swords, leading armies and defending cities when the men were too slow, too dead, or too busy with politics. Take Kayla bint al-Azwas, a name that still echoes in Arabic folklore like a battle cry, a 7th century warrior during the first Muslim conquests. She fought alongside, was either deadly serious or politically charged. Take Kayla bint al-Azwa as an example, a name that still echoes in Arab folklore like a battle cry, a 7th century warrior during the first Islamic conquests. She fought alongside her brother in battle after being captured by Byzantine forces. She burst through enemy lines in black armor, swinging her sword so skillfully soldiers mistook her for Khalid ibn al-Walid, the famed general known as the Sword of Allah. When her identity was revealed, morale didn't drop one bit. That was the sword. She earned her place amongst warriors through pure skill and guts. Women like Kayla weren't just battlefield oddities. In times of crisis, especially during sieges, women grabbed weapons to defend their homes and cities. During the 13th century Mongol invasion and the fall of the Khwarezm Empire, stories popped up about women fighting in the streets of Nishapur and other cities, hurling stones, swinging daggers, turning their homes into fortresses. They were never formally trained, but desperation makes a great teacher. Further west, in Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, noble women weren't just locked up either. Some held serious political and military influence. Wada bint al-Mustakfi, best known as a poet, lived in a world where women of her class often managed estates and defended them during civil unrest. Centuries later, during the Reconquista, Muslim women sometimes stood side by side with their husbands defending Granada's last strongholds. Then there's Sayyida al-Hura, not exactly a battlefield warrior, but a pirate queen. In the 16th century, She commanded fleets in the western Mediterranean, terrifying European ships, an ally of the infamous Barbarossa of the Ottoman Navy. She was both a political leader and naval commander, a double threat on sea and land. In many Muslim societies, ideals of modesty ran alongside harsh realities. When cities burned and armies fell, veils lifted and swords were drawn. And in those moments, history didn't remember them as rule breakers, but as warriors rewriting the rules. For centuries, history books told us war was a man's domain. Men led, men fought, men died gloriously, while women waited, wept, or patched wounds in the background. But look closer and you'll find a different story. The tale of women who didn't wait for an invite to fight. They tore up battlefields, often driven more by courage than glory, from the horse-riding Scythian archers who probably inspired the Amazon myths, to African queens who toppled empires, to gladiator women painting the sand red. Every continent has warrior women's stories. Sometimes they were born leaders, like Queen Amina or Boudica. Other times, ordinary women stepped up when chaos left no other choice, like medieval women dressing in armor or defending ancient cities under siege. What ties them together isn't just bravery, it's a refusal to be erased. Their legacy isn't measured by battles won, but by rules broken. They challenged cultural norms, religious expectations, and political boundaries. They forced generals, emperors, and chroniclers to rethink their assumptions. Often, that meant being deliberately wiped from the records. After all, what empire wants to admit it was shaken by a woman wielding a spear? Yet traces remain in bones buried with weapons, in poems, in hurried notes from historians unsure what to make of them, in oral traditions, songs, and temple murals. The stories survive, not always intact, not always celebrated, but vivid enough to inspire generations after. Modern military history is only just beginning to fully recognize women's huge role in war. The point isn't to put women above men in battle. The point is to acknowledge they were always there, even when never allowed to show up. So next time someone calls women in war an exception, remind them from North African deserts to snowy Central Asian slopes, from castle sieges to cavalry charges. Women were not. They were more than just part of the war story. They were the plot twists, the hidden key points. Sword history tried to shove them into the sheath, but never quite managed, because once the sword is drawn, it doesn't care who holds it. It only cares what they're willing to do with it. Marcus Aurelius was born on April 26th, 121 AD in Rome, the heart of an empire stretching from Britain to the sands of Arabia. His full birth name was Marcus Annius Verus, coming from a noble line with a long-standing tradition in the Senate. In other words, he didn't start from zero. His grandfather had been a consul, and his family was loaded not just with cash, but political clout too. Yet young Marcus, not spoiled one bit by all that luxury. Even as a kid, he was known as serious, and quiet, and thoughtful, the kind of kid who probably skipped playing with toys to ask deep. philosophical questions instead. Emperor Hadrian noticed this moody, deep thinker and saw something rare in the boy integrity. He nicknamed him Marcus Verissimus, which means the most honest man, and set him on a path few could even dream of. When Hadrian's first heir died suddenly, he adopted Antoninus Pius on the condition that Antoninus would adopt Marcus Aurelius as his heir. So Marcus found himself on a slow-moving conveyor belt of responsibility, inching toward absolute power. His education was no joke. Tutors schooled him in Greek and Roman literature, rhetoric, and philosophy. But while most noble kids treated lessons like chores, Marcus embraced them religiously, especially Stoicism. He read Epictetus and Seneca, not like abstract theory, but as a moral compass. For him, philosophy wasn't a brain teaser, it was a life manual. He started sleeping on hard floors, dressing plainly, and fasting, not because someone told him to, but because he wanted to toughen his soul. During his years under Antoninus Pius's watchful eye, Marcus learned more than management. He learned patience. Antoninus ruled calmly and effectively for over 20 years. Marcus watched every move, every decision. Like a student prepping for a final exam he knew was coming. Unlike many heirs hungry for the crown, Marcus saw power as a duty he'd never dodge, one demanding discipline, self-denial, and, above all, moral clarity. In short, Rome wasn't getting a party prince. It was prepping to crown a philosopher king. When Antoninus Pius died in 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius finally took the throne, but true to form, he didn't greet it with cheers. Instead, he immediately insisted on sharing power with Lucius Verus, his adoptive brother, a political move soaked in humility and pragmatism. Rome was just too huge, too complex, and frankly too wild for one guy, even a philosopher, to handle. Lucius Verus was the opposite of Marcus in every way. While Marcus was serious and disciplined, Verus loved lavish parties and gladiator games. Marcus studied philosophy by candlelight. Lucius hired chefs and actors, yet somehow, this odd couple worked better than expected, mostly because Marcus focused on management, while Lucius led the army, and Rome was never short on military emergencies. Just months into their joint rule, the Parthian Empire, Rome's eastern rival, decided it was time for some drama. Lucius Verus commanded the campaign while Marcus handled resources and logistics. The war dragged on for years, but ended with a Roman win. So, a win-win, right? Well, not exactly. The returning legions brought more than glory. They brought disease. A mysterious plague, now thought to be smallpox or measles, ravaged the empire. The Antonine Plague killed about 5 million people, including a big chunk of the Roman army. Cities were wrecked, crops failed, panic spread, and just when things couldn't get worse, they did. Germanic tribes along the Danube frontier smelled weakness and started hammering Rome's borders. Rome was under attack. from all sides: disease, war, political chaos. Marcus, fresh on the throne, found himself in a disaster. Lucius Verus died in 169 AD, probably from the plague, leaving Marcus to rule alone with the full weight of the world on his shoulders. Most rulers would have crumbled, but Marcus, calm and thoughtful, stood firm, seeing adversity not as chaos, but as a challenge, a fire to endure, not avoid. He didn't whine. He didn't back down. He returned to his stoic principles and faced Rome's unraveling with a silent determination. After all, for Marcus, becoming emperor wasn't about personal glory. It was duty, no matter how painful. In the early 170s AD, Marcus Aurelius swapped his senator's cloak for a soldier's. The Germanic tribes, especially the Marcomanni, Quadi, and Sarmatians, were flooding across the Danube, encouraged by Rome's weakened defenses after a recent plague. Marcus didn't hand this mess off to a marble palace. He rode north. He set up camp and stayed year after year, leading from the front like a general, not some philosopher king, in harsh border conditions, surrounded by mud, cold, sickness, and constant danger. Marcus wrote one of history's most quietly revolutionary texts, Meditations. He didn't write it to publish, to glorify, or even gift his heir. It was a private journal, a philosophical diary where he reminded himself how to stay moral, rational, and calm in a crazy world, while other emperors were busy building triumphal arches. Marcus built a fortress inside himself. Sometimes he was inspecting fortifications or negotiating with tribal chiefs. Then he'd jot down thoughts like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize that, and you find strength." This wasn't a campaign slogan. It was pure maintenance. The war was brutal. The Germanic tribes weren't pushovers. They knew the terrain, used guerrilla tactics, and were desperate. But Marcus pushed forward, applying Roman military tactics, reorganizing legions, and making tough calls like giving slaves and non-Romans positions in the army to earn loyalty. Traditionalists complained, but Marcus didn't care. He needed bodies, not bloodlines. Despite constant pressure, Marcus refused to get cruel, while his generals pushed scorched earth campaigns. He often chose diplomacy. When cities fell, he banned unnecessary slaughter. When tribes surrendered, he granted them land and autonomy, not destruction. Even on the battlefield, he clung to stoic principles, like a man clutching a raft in a storm. He didn't miss the irony. The guy who valued peace over glory became one of Rome's most battle-hardened emperors, yet he endured it all with calm. He didn't fight for conquest or fame. He fought to save a collapsing empire, and maybe to test if philosophy could survive in the mud and blood of real life. Spoiler, it can. While Marcus Aurelius commanded legions and dealt with border invasions, his most lasting legacy wasn't forged by sword, but by pen, amid tents, snow, and the groans of wounded soldiers. Marcus started writing what we call Meditations, a collection of deep thoughts on life, virtue, suffering, and death. He didn't write it to impress anyone. This wasn't a public statement or propaganda. They were reminders to himself, spiritual armor, notes from a man, trying his best to hold on to his humanity while overseeing a world falling apart. Stop wasting time arguing about what a good man should be. Just be that man. This isn't the voice of an emperor basking in glory. It's a guy constantly reminding himself to live with integrity, even when no one's watching. The text reveals a continuous inner struggle. Marcus wasn't just fighting Germanic tribes, but his own impulses, anger, pride, and despair in one passage. He reminds himself not to expect gratitudes in another. He reflects that even emperors are just forgotten dust. He writes that soon you'll forget everything, and soon everything will forget you. Cheerful, right? Unless you're a Stoic, because Stoicism isn't about joy or control, it's accepting reality, no matter how brutal. Unless you're a Stoic, because Stoicism isn't about fun or control, it's about accepting reality, no matter how brutal, and choosing virtue in every moment. For Marcus, that meant doing his duty, showing up, leading with integrity, and not losing. His cool when plague and war turned everything upside down. He wasn't trying to dodge suffering. He was trying to hang in there. Meditations was written in Greek, the smarty pants language of the time, and packed with quotes from Epictetus and other Stoic philosophers. But it's shockingly modern. Marcus fretted about burnout. He told himself to stay calm around grumpy people. He reminded himself that fame is fleeting, pleasure is overrated, and death is just natural, like an original self-help book, but without the influencer or affiliate marketing nonsense. What makes it stand out is its humanity. Here's the most powerful man in the world, sitting by candlelight, trying to be decent and doubting himself all the time. He doesn't preach perfection. He preaches effort. Effort to be fair, kind, rational, even when surrounded by sickness, war, betrayal, and death. And that's why his words still echo today, because Marcus didn't just rule Rome, he ruled himself. While Marcus Aurelius was busy managing invasions and keeping his inner peace with philosophy, his personal life, not so peaceful. He married young Faustina, Emperor Antoninus Pius's daughter, a political alliance that, on paper at least, looked pretty lovey-dovey. They had 13 kids, 13, but ancient Rome was brutal to kids. Only a handful survived infancy. Marcus buried 8 of his children. Pause and imagine a guy who daily reflects on life's impermanence, having to live through that pain again and again. While the meditations rarely mention these personal losses outright, the grim, determined, painful tone hints at grief that's hard to swallow. Stoicism doesn't erase pain, it just gave him tools to endure it. Then there's the Faustina drama. Roman historians, who loved gossip more than facts, accused her of everything from cheating to treason. The infamous Dio and Historia Augusta claimed she had affairs with gladiators, soldiers, and maybe even plotted against Marcus. But Marcus never publicly condemned her. In fact, after she died in 175 AD, He honored her with temples, coins, and statues. Either he didn't buy the rumors, or he chose forgiveness over scandal. But family tension didn't stop there. One surviving son, Commodus, was being groomed to rule, and let's just say Commodus was nothing like his dad in temperament or philosophy. While Marcus was writing about humility and restraint, young Commodus was more into flashy shows, wrestling matches, and self-worship. Still, Marcus stuck to the Roman tradition of father-to-son succession. Despite red flags that Commodus might be a disaster, Marcus refused to break tradition. He made Commodus co-emperor in 177 AD, a decision that would cast a dark shadow over his legacy. Pressure was mounting inside and outside the empire. Marcus rarely caught a break, if not for chaos outside, then for private grief. But he never quit. He pushed legal reforms, championed philosophy, and stabilized an empire surrounded by change and decay on all sides. Throughout it all, Marcus Aurelius stayed calm, dedicated, and above all, deeply human. He was a ruler tested not just by the sword, but by love, loss, and legacy. Like the plague, invasions, and family drama weren't enough. Marcus faced betrayal, the kind that cuts deepest when it comes from inside the tent. In 175 AD, a respected general named Avidius Cassius declared himself emperor. This wasn't some minor provincial rebellion. Cassius was governor of Syria and trusted by Marcus with massive military power. And honestly, it wasn't entirely his fault. A false rumor reached Cassius Marcus was dead. Instead of checking the facts, Cassius moved fast. Governor of Syria and the man Marcus trusted with huge military power. And honestly, it wasn't entirely his fault. False rumors reached Cassius Marcus was dead. Instead of checking the facts, Cassius moved fast. He accepted the emperor title, hoping to grab power before the Senate or other legions could react. Classic Roman ambition spreading faster than Roman news. The East braced for civil war, but Marcus wasn't freaking out. No shouting betrayal. He just started prepping an Eastern campaign, not for revenge, but for reconciliation. Believe it or not, Marcus even considered forgiving Cassius. He believed in. That's resilience, keeping calm, not just in chaos, but when personally insulted. But Marcus never got to show off that mercy. Before he could get east, Cassius got whacked by his own officers, probably scared the emperor's arrival would mess with their plans. His head was sent to Marcus as a gift. Rumor has it Marcus cried. For him, this rebellion wasn't just a power threat. It was a tragedy, a symbol of loyalty crumbling, the simmering unrest that would eventually choke the empire. After the rebellion, Marcus toured the eastern provinces not angry, but for ceremony. He held public rituals, reaffirmed loyalty, and made sure no one, especially the soldiers, misunderstood his intentions. But cracks in the empire kept spreading. Plague was thinning the population. Borders were still bleeding. Even Rome's inner circle was starting to fall apart. Marcus saw it all, but still believed in reason, justice, and virtue. Even as Rome started to crumble, he tried patching it up one stubborn breath at a time. As Marcus Aurelius neared the end of his life, He didn't kick back on a marble villa. Nope. He was back at the frontier, leading military campaigns against Germanic tribes along the Danube, despite age and failing health. He returned to the battlefield for a mission that never really ends. Marcus was relentless. The Marcomannic Wars dragged on for years, draining Rome's resources and spirit. Marcus knew this wasn't just about land. It was about survival. The Germanic tribes weren't raiding for fun. They were pushed south by migrating groups, part of a domino effect that would topple Rome centuries later. But in the 170s AD, Marcus did everything he could to hold the line. He reorganized border defenses, resettled refugee tribes as loyal Roman allies, and kept writing philosophical musings between battles. In one odd meditation, he reminded himself, "Don't act like you'll live 10,000 years. Death is hanging over your head." These weren't just abstract thoughts. They came from a man fully aware his time was running out. In 180 AD, while camped in what's now Vienna, Marcus fell seriously ill, probably the same plague haunting his reign. Accounts say he called his son Commodus over and gave some last advice, whether philosophy, practicality, or desperation. History forgot. What we know is Marcus died shortly after, on March 17th, 180 AD, surrounded not by senators or scribes, but by soldiers. His death marked the end of what many historians call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It also marked the end of Rome's philosopher kings. Commodus took the throne, and spoiler alert, he was nothing like Marcus. Rome's decline didn't start with a bang, but with Marcus's eyes quietly closing and his legacy slowly unraveling. No victory parade, no final speech, just a dying emperor at a cold northern outpost, doing what he always did: endure, reflect, and play his part till the bitter end. Marcus didn't chase immortality through monuments. He went for it through character, and he nailed it. Marcus Aurelius spent his whole life preaching moderation, discipline, and reason. Forgotten history. What we do know is Marcus died shortly after, on March 17th of 180 AD, surrounded not by senators or secretaries, but by soldiers. His death marked the end of what many historians call the Pax Romana, Rome's peace. This also marked the end of Rome's era of philosopher kings. Commodus would inherit the throne, and spoiler alert, he was no Marcus. Rome's decline didn't start with a bang, but with the quiet closing of Marcus's eyes and the slow unraveling of his legacy. No victory parade, no final speech, just a dying emperor at a cold northern outpost, doing what he always did: endure, reflect, and play his part until the very end. Marcus didn't seek immortality through monuments. He sought it through character. And he succeeded. Marcus Aurelius spent his life preaching moderation, discipline, and reason so naturally. The gods handed the reins to Commodus. When Marcus died in 180 AD, he left the empire to a 19-year-old kid who seemed way less interested in stoic virtues and way more obsessed with gladiator outfits. Commodus loved dressing up like Hercules when he fought in the arena, and called himself the Roman Hercules because modesty was clearly out the window. That wasn't just embarrassing, it was a complete disaster. Under Commodus, Rome spiraled into decay, paranoia, and administrative chaos. He alienated the Senate, indulged in lavish parties, and executed his rivals like he was picking out groceries. While Marcus saw power as a sacred burden, Commodus treated it like a reality show prize. Bread and circuses became the daily special, so historians have been haunted by this question ever since. Why did Marcus, a wise philosopher and thoughtful emperor, leave the empire to a guy like that? Was it blind love, terrible judgment? Or was Marcus just too hooked on Roman tradition and succession to see any other way? Actually, Marcus had options. He could have picked a capable general or senator as heir. He could have broken tradition like Emperor Nerva and adopted a worthy successor. But nope, he didn't. He made Commodus co-emperor in 177 AD, maybe hoping his son would learn by example. Spoiler alert, he didn't. One of the biggest ironies in ancient history, the emperor who penned Meditations, a timeless intellectual work about human nature, couldn't or wouldn't stop his own son from becoming a walking disaster for the empire. Marcus wasn't blind to his son's flaws. His own writings hint at disappointment and warnings about flattery, pride, indulgence, all traits Commodus happily embraced. Yet Marcus never disowned him, whether out of love, duty, or sheer exhaustion. He passed the torch and watched the house burn down. Commodus's reign ended in assassination, plunging Rome into the year of the 5 emperors, a grim finale to a dynasty defined by stoic resilience. Marcus held the empire together with brains and willpower. Commodus ripped it apart with ego and showmanship. But maybe that's the last stoic lesson here. Even emperors can't control the future, only how they face it. Marcus Aurelius died nearly 2,000 years ago, but his influence never faded. He was a rare ruler, not just powerful, but principled. His Meditations, written during wars and sleepless nights, outlasted the fall of empires, the rise of religions, and the march of time to become one of history's most treasured philosophical texts. His legacy is full of contradictions. As emperor, he faced endless wars, plagues, rebellions, and personal loss. Yet he's admired not for victories or monuments, but for wisdom, restraint, compassion, and refusing to be corrupted by absolute power. He didn't play God. He didn't demand worship. He wrote in simple Greek about how to be a better human. Act as if every act in life is your last. Modern thinkers, from politicians to CEOs, athletes to therapists, still quote Marcus. His words appear on posters, in therapy sessions, business guides, and quiet moments of personal crisis were because he didn't talk like a king. He talked like a flawed human trying his best to stand tall in a crumbling world. Still, Marcus's legacy is bittersweet, though wise. His reign marked the start of Rome's Golden Age decline. His son Commodus sped up the fall, and later emperors rarely matched his dignity and self-control. Marcus was like the last beat of moral clarity before the fever took hold. And maybe that's the creepiest part of his story, that the man who understood Impermanence better than anyone left behind something strange and eternal. His empire fell, his bloodline faded, but his raw, intimate, unpolished reflections survived. They lasted because they never wanted to. They were never edited, never polished for an audience. And that's exactly what makes them immortal. These are the private whispers of a public figure, the diary of an emperor just hoping to live well, die fairly, and not leave the world worse off when he's gone. And honestly, maybe that's all any of us can hope for. Marcus pulled it off in flip-flops, on horseback, pen in hand, taking steady breaths. Over in ancient Babylon, justice wasn't just handed down by kings, it was carved in stone for everyone to see. Around 1754 BC, King Hammurabi had a towering stone stele built, etched with one of the earliest and most influential legal codes in human history, the Code of Hammurabi. Standing over 7 feet tall and written in cuneiform, this black basalt monument was all about showing off order and power. It wasn't just law, it was a warning. The code had 282 rules covering everything from trade and family affairs to theft and assault. But don't get any ideas about democracy here. These laws reflected a rigid social hierarchy where punishments depended heavily on your social rank. For example, if a noble broke another noble's bone, the punishment was to break his own bone, a classic case of eye for an eye gone literal. But if that same noble broke the bone of a commoner or slave, the penalty was just a fine, justice in. This system was not only about the crime, but also about who got hurt. The law emphasized personal responsibility and state authority. Shoddy builders whose houses collapsed and killed residents could face execution. Dishonest merchants might get mutilated. Even family disputes were tightly controlled with strict rules on marriage, inheritance and custody. Adultery, theft, and false accusations were severely punished, often by death or public humiliation. What made this code revolutionary wasn't just the content, but its visibility. The stele was placed in public, carved with an image of Hammurabi receiving divine power from Shamash, the god of light and justice. This wasn't just a legal document, it was propaganda, hammering home the idea that Hammurabi ruled by divine right and that his laws were sacred and unchangeable, harsh by today's standards. Sure, but the Code of Hammurabi set the precedent that laws should be written down, standardized, and understandable. It swapped random judgments for codified rules. By doing so, it laid the groundwork for legal systems across the ancient world and continues to fascinate historians, lawyers, and ethicists alike. In Babylon, justice wasn't blind. It was watching you with a chisel in hand. Over in ancient Egypt, justice wasn't just a legal concept, but a cosmic force. Egyptians believed in Ma'at, a sacred principle embodying truth, balance, and moral order. More than a goddess, Ma'at was the foundation of the universe. Pharaohs ruled not just by power, but by responsibility to protect their people. In doing so, they maintained harmony between gods, nature, and society, Unlike Babylon's fixed laws, Egypt's justice system was more flexible, adapting to each case. There was no single code carved in stone. Instead, judges, usually high officials or priests, interpreted Ma'at in their rulings. While this allowed tailored decisions, it also meant justice could be pretty subjective and dependent on the social status of those involved. Court procedures were both formal and theatrical. Cases might be heard by local officials or higher royal courts. Depending on the severity, plaintiffs and defendants presented their sides, and witnesses were crucial. Records, contracts, testimonies, and petitions were kept on papyrus, a pretty advanced filing system for the time. For petty crimes like theft or assault, punishments could include fines, beatings, or forced labor. More serious offenses like tomb robbery or blasphemy weren't just considered crimes. Beatings or forced labor. More serious offenses like grave robbing or blasphemy weren't just crimes against the state. They were offenses against the gods too. Punishment sometimes meant being burned alive, drowned, impaled, or even death sentences for disrespecting the dead, to stop them from crossing over into the afterlife. Probably the most iconic image of Egyptian justice comes from the Book of the Dead, where the deceased's heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was heavy with guilt, it got gobbled up by Amet, a crocodile lion hippo monster, and the soul was sentenced to oblivion. If the heart balanced with the feather, the soul got VIP access to eternal paradise in the reed fields. In Egypt, justice was inseparable from spirituality. The courtroom wasn't just a place for disputes, it was sacred ground where divine order was kept. Unlike Babylon's rigid laws, Egyptian justice flowed with Ma'at's moral vibe, rewarding those who lived in harmony with truth and punishing those who messed up the cosmic balance. Over in ancient Greece, especially Athens in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, justice looked totally different from the god-king-centered systems of Babylon and Egypt. The Greeks kicked off something revolutionary, a judicial system based on citizenship, debate, and public involvement. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it laid the groundwork for many modern legal ideas. Athenian democracy gave every male citizen the right to take part in court as plaintiff, defendant, or juror. No judges or professional lawyers. Instead, a huge jury, sometimes hundreds strong, was randomly picked from the public. These jurors didn't just hear cases, they decided verdicts and punishments, with no appeals allowed. Trials were short, usually wrapped up in a day, with each side getting a set time to make their case, timed by a water clock called a clepsydra. Cases ranged from theft, slander, adultery, assault, property disputes, to even disrespecting the gods. Minor offenses usually meant fines or exile, but serious crimes could bring the death penalty, especially for treason or religious blasphemy. For example, Socrates got the death sentence for allegedly corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. The key thing about Greek justice was that it wasn't based on a single written code everyone could access. Sure, some laws were public, But most legal knowledge was held by a small, literate elite, meaning outcomes often hinged more on rhetoric than precedent. A clever speaker or wealthy citizen who could hire a skilled orator had a clear advantage. Justice was tightly linked to persuasion and performance. The Athenians also had a form of preventive justice called ostracism, where citizens could vote once a year to exile someone from the city for 10 years. No need to prove a crime, just a consensus that the person was too dangerous or too powerful for the state's safety, despite its flaws. Ancient Greece introduced the idea that justice could be a collective civic responsibility, not just the ruler's or priest's decree. It was a chaotic early experiment in legal equality that still echoes in courtrooms today. In ancient India, justice came from a deep, layered concept called dharma, a tricky word to translate, but it roughly means duty, integrity, and the cosmic order. Unlike Babylon's laws or Greek civil courts, Indian justice wasn't just about right or wrong. Echoes through today's courtrooms. In ancient India, justice came from a deep, multi-layered idea called dharma, a fancy word that's hard to translate, but basically means duty, integrity, and the cosmic order. Unlike Babylon's laws or Greek civil courts, Indian justice wasn't just about right and wrong. It was about keeping harmony in the universe, society, and yourself. The law shifted based on your age, class, gender, and life stage, turning justice into a seriously complex ethical puzzle. The legal framework in ancient India was first officially set down in texts called the Dharma Shastras, with the most famous one being the Manusmriti, or Laws of Manu, written sometime between the 2nd century BCE and the 3rd century CE. These weren't laws like we know them today, more like spiritual and social guidelines that shaped legal thinking for centuries. They covered everything from property rights and inheritance to marriage contracts and punishments. The caste system was the star of this legal show. Brahmins, the priests, kshatriyas, the warriors, vaishyas, the merchants, and shudras, the workers, all had different rules and penalties to follow. For example, a Brahmin breaking the law might get fined or temporarily banned from rituals, while a Shudra doing the same thing could face corporal punishment or worse. Justice here wasn't blind. It was hierarchical and tied tightly to your birth status. Still, ancient Indian justice wasn't totally heartless. Intent mattered a lot, as did repentance. Offenders could soften their sentence by showing remorse or making charitable donations, and judges were encouraged to consider the moral and spiritual state of the accused. Kings often acted as the highest court, advised by scholars and Brahmin ministers, blending divine law with royal edicts. Trials could include oral hearings, especially when evidence was shaky. These ordeals included holding a hot iron rod, walking over fire, or grabbing stuff from boiling oil, supposedly to reveal guilt or innocence by divine will. Such methods were a last resort, not the usual routine. Above all, ancient Indian justice aimed to restore cosmic balance. It wasn't just about punishing criminals. It was about wiping out spiritual mistakes, fixing social disorder, and guiding souls back to righteousness. It was a legal system where ethics, religion, and law were inseparable across the ancient world. When legal systems hit snags like lack of evidence, unreliable witnesses, or unprovable accusations, societies often called on the gods to decide. One of the most terrifying and dramatic ways was through harsh ordeals, used in cultures from Babylon to India and later medieval Europe. The idea was simple but brutal. If human justice couldn't figure out guilt, divine justice would step in through pain. In Babylon, a common torture was tossing the accused into a river. If they floated or survived, the gods had forgiven them, and they were declared innocent. If they drowned, guilt was confirmed. Though, inconveniently, the dead escape punishment. This method reflected a deep faith in divine oversight, since water was seen as a sacred and fair force in ancient India. As Dharma texts show, there were many kinds of ordeals. These included walking on hot iron plowshares, picking coins from boiling oil, or surviving poison exposure. The logic wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake, but divine judgment. Surviving unscathed or with minor injuries was proof of innocence. People believed the gods wouldn't let the innocent suffer without a good reason, though horrifying by today's standards. Ordeal trials weren't always just about physical pain. Sometimes they involved oaths sworn in sacred places. Swearing on something holy or invoking a god's wrath was meant to bind the speaker to truthfulness. Lying under such conditions supposedly brought immediate divine punishment or consequences in the afterlife. The psychological power of these ordeals was huge. They could scare the guilty into confessing and strengthen believers' faith in cosmic justice, but they also exposed how fragile human legal systems were. Ancient people deeply felt the need for something beyond human judgment. Oral trials were often the last resort, a way to solve cases no one else could, even though these relied on supernatural outcomes. The debates still reflected a thirst for justice. They were brutal, sure, but oddly democratic. Both kings and farmers had to bow to their rule. Without forensics or legal procedures, misery was the courtroom, and the gods were expected to play judge, jury, and executioner in ancient Egypt. Justice wasn't served by fair courts or elected juries. It came straight from the divine power of the pharaoh. As a king and living god, Pharaoh was basically Ma'at's earthly avatar, the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order. So, keeping justice wasn't just political, it was a sacred duty. Pharaoh had the ultimate legal say. He could overrule any verdict, order executions, pardon criminals, or rewrite laws on a whim. This kind of power wasn't justified by human logic, but by divine approval. Disobeying Pharaoh was like throwing the universe out of whack. But Pharaoh didn't rule solo. A sprawling bureaucracy stretched across Egypt, from royal officials in the capital to local judges in towns. These officials acted as judges, clerks, and investigators. Their decisions followed royal decrees and Ma'at's principles more than any formal legal code. Written laws were rare, mostly built on case precedents and scribal training. Courts came in all shapes and sizes, in small villages. Disputes might be settled by elders, councils, or temple priests. In bigger cities, formal courts handled complex cases about property, theft, assault, and inheritance. Events were carefully recorded on papyrus scrolls, many of which survive today, giving us a rare peek at how ancient Egyptians argued and judged. Trials included witness testimony and written evidence. Plaintiffs and defendants gave sworn statements. Witnesses were called, and physical evidence examined when available. False accusations were taken seriously, and if proven, accusers faced the same punishments as defendants. Punishments ranged wildly, from compensation and fines to beatings, forced labor, or execution. Crimes against temples, tombs, or royal property got especially harsh treatment. Still, the system stressed restoration and compensation. Often, wrongdoers got a chance to make things right, especially if they confessed voluntarily. What made Egyptian justice unique was this mix of absolute monarchy with moral expectations. Pharaoh could rule unchecked, but he was expected to wield that power fairly, in the eyes of people and gods alike. A just ruler wasn't just terrifying. He was revered as the guardian of cosmic balance, while divine kings and priests dominated justice in many ancient civilizations. Ancient Greece, especially democratic Athens, took a totally different approach. Justice was no longer the exclusive playground of gods and kings. It became a public duty shared and carried out by the people through councils and assemblies. In Athens, justice was mainly managed by two main bodies: the ecclesia, a citizen assembly, and the Heliaia, a huge people's court made up of citizen jurors. Laws and justice weren't handed down by rulers anymore. They were crafted by ordinary male citizens who took turns managing the system. Laws were proposed and voted on in the assembly, while trials were run by large juries, sometimes 500 or more, to block bribery or manipulation. There were no judges like we think of today. Instead, judges were chosen by lottery or popular vote to oversee trials and keep procedures in check. But the real decision makers were the randomly picked jurors, all citizens over 30. No appeals, no deliberation time. Verdicts were final and punishments voted on right after guilt was decided. The system prized persuasive speech over evidence. Both sides had to represent themselves or hire skilled orators to write a speech on my behalf. Rhetoric is everything, and skillfully manipulating public emotions can totally change the outcome. While this system encouraged citizen participation, it also meant justice could be uneven, less about law and more about persuasion. For some political issues or state threats, special councils were called in. One famous mechanism was ostracism. People voted once a year to kick out anyone seen as a danger to democracy. No crime needed, just public agreement that someone's influence was unhealthy. 10 years of exile, no trial, no defense, despite its flaws. The Greek council system brought powerful new ideas, the importance of peer review, open debate, and the idea that laws belong to the people, messy, emotional, and sometimes unfair, but also revolutionary. In Greek courts, the courtroom was a stage, the people were the judges, and justice was a public performance where everyone had a role and power was briefly held in the hands of the citizens. In ancient India, justice wasn't just about courts and punishment. It was tied to karma, the belief that every action carries moral weight and spiritual consequences, both in this life and the next. Unlike Greek civil courts or Egyptian royal decrees, Indian justice emphasized a cosmic ledger where no wrongdoing escaped. Ultimate accountability. Karma isn't a legal system. It's a moral law rooted in Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Good deeds bring positive results. Bad deeds bring suffering, just maybe not immediately. A thief might dodge human justice, but the universe will balance the scales. This belief reinforced ethical behavior even without enforcement. Still, ancient India had structured laws, Manusmriti and other legal texts, guided not only courts, but individual conduct. They laid out duties for each social class and role, reinforcing that justice isn't one size fits all. Kings were expected to rule by doctrine, and if they didn't, there were spiritual and political consequences. Buddhism, born in the 5th century BCE, deepened the karmic view of justice. It rejected legal inequality based on caste and promoted universal ethics, nonviolence, honesty, and compassion, while not a legal code. Buddhist ethics influenced rulers like Emperor Ashoka in the 3rd century BCE, who gave up conquest and reformed his empire according to Buddhist values. His famous rock edicts spoke of mercy, tolerance, and the moral responsibilities of rulers. Justice, then, wasn't just trials and punishment. It involved inner purity, intent, and spiritual accountability. Someone might escape the king's punishment, but not the consequences of their own actions. Similarly, an unjust king was believed to gather suffering for himself in future lives. This karmic understanding of justice created a strong inner order for many. It was deeply personal and scarier than any earthly authority, whether enforced by law or left to the universe. Indian civilization saw justice not just as punishment, but as a restoring force for harmony between self, society, and the cosmos. Thousands of years have passed since Babylon, Egypt, Greece, and India rose. Yet their justice systems still shape how we think about crime, punishment, and fairness today. These ancient civilizations laid the intellectual, ethical, and procedural foundations for legal systems that still govern societies worldwide. Babylon gave us the earliest codified laws, the idea that justice must be public, consistent, and enforced by the state. The eye for an eye principle still pops up in legal and moral debates, symbolizing the call for proportional punishment and the dangers of over-the-top punishments. Egypt introduced the idea of divine kingship and moral laws, where justice wasn't just about society, but the entire universe. The focus on balance, truth, and harmony shows up in today's ideas of restorative justice, where the goal isn't just punishment, but restoring community balance. Greece flipped the script on justice by tying it to citizenship and participation, jury trials, public debates, and peer judgments. Kicked off in Athens and still run the show in many legal systems today. Sure, it wasn't perfect and was pretty exclusive, but Greek democracy planted the seeds for legal systems that value public involvement and accountability. India made deep spiritual and ethical contributions to justice. Ideas of law and karma laid down an ethical foundation for the legal system, promoting personal responsibility and self-regulation. Even today, Indian law is a mixed bag, where British legal structures coexist with religious and customary laws, showing the lasting power of ancient traditions. These systems weren't flawless. They often were unjust, classist, patriarchal, and downright brutal. They favored the elite, punished the vulnerable, and enforced strict hierarchies, but they also raised crucial questions that still matter today. Who gets to define justice? Is it divine authority, citizen consensus, or moral truth? Should laws be equal for everyone or tailored to social roles? How do you balance punishment and mercy? Modern laws might be more humane and structured, but they still carry the DNA of these original systems. We're still carving laws into stone, metaphorically, hoping they keep order. We still debate justice in courts, councils, and temples of thought, and we're still wrestling with the eternal tug-of-war between power and fairness, law and morality, crime and consequence. In many ways, our chase for justice started long ago and isn't stopping anytime soon.